Schreier, and welcome to In the Scenes. Here are some updates on what's happening in the film industry. The Gotham Award nominations have been announced, and Anora is leading the pack with 4 nominations. The Gotham Awards are dedicated to highlighting independent films in an awards race that can tend towards bigger, more expensive films. Along with Anora, the other nominees for Best Feature are Baby Girl, Challengers, A Different Man, and Nickel Boys. With the announcements of the Gotham's nominations, we are officially in this year's award season. Buckle up for the long winter of precursor awards. At the box office, Venom: The Last Dance opened last weekend to $51 million. While not as big a drop-off as some sequels, this is actually an underperformance in comparison to Venom: Let There Be Carnage, which premiered to $90 million in 2021. The film wraps up the Venom trilogy, in which Tom Hardy plays the dual role of Eddie Brock and the symbiote that's attached to him. Other players at the box office include Smile 2, which has made about $44.1 million to date, and The Wild Robot, which has made about $113.3 million over the past month. We're also seeing more awards players getting released, including Conclave, Anora, and We Live in Time. In weirder news, actor and comedian Jay Johnston has been sentenced to 12 months and a day in federal prison for his role in the January 6th riots. Johnston was best known for his voice role on the show Bob's Burgers, voicing Jimmy Pesto, and his part of the sketch show Mr. Show. Johnston's sentencing comes after he pleaded guilty to obstruction of law enforcement, but Johnston had been banned from Bob's Burgers since 2021 after his role in the Capitol riot came to light. In Marvel news, Tom Holland is returning to his role as Spider-Man. Holland revealed the news to the world on Jimmy Fallon, and the film is slated to premiere July 24th, 2026. Currently, plot details are being kept under wraps, but Destin Daniel Cretton, director of Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, has been confirmed to direct. The film will premiere the same month as the next Christopher Nolan film, which is slated for release on July 17th. That film has also added Holland to its cast, starring alongside Matt Damon. Although we still don't know the plot of either film, they're already highly anticipated, and excitement is sure to grow. That's all I have for you today, and now, here's Asher Thompson and Jamie Bass.
Thanks, Fiona. I'm Asher.
And I'm Jamie.
And this is In the Scenes,
a show where we break down aspects of filmmaking through the films that we love.
Today, we're gonna... Jamie? Jamie?
Hi, man. What's going on? We're going to talk about the show?
Yeah.
All right. Anyways, today's episode is going to be about Asher? Asher? Oh, there you are.
Yeah. We'll be talking about editing. Jamie, what makes editing stand out to you?
I'm glad you asked. So the thing is about filmmaking is that it is the thing that makes filmmaking such a unique art form in that you can't do this thing anywhere else is the editing. Mm-hmm. So like, acting can be done on stage. You can write, novels. You can, paint. Like compositionally, everything is already existing. But editing is what makes filmmaking, right? Because like, how else are we going to move from scene to scene?
It's the sort of combination of all the different things and the timing of that sort of makes filmmaking what it is.
Exclusive to filmmaking. You can't have it in theater on the stage. You can't have it on painting. You can't. It's
not yet.
Not yet. But and I think just what I look for when I notice a film's editing is how the pace works. A slow-paced film is you need to figure out the pace of your film before making it. And slow-paced films can work, but there are some cases where films are slow-paced, but they don't feel like they were supposed to be slow-paced, and that's all in the edit. So if the edit is jumbled or a lot more glacial than it should be, then it can really make a movie a chore to watch. I think the most important thing to for me, enjoying watching a movie is to see if the editing does the story and the characters' favors.
Sort of carries the work just a step further. Because what you don't want to have is a movie where, let's say you're in a kitchen, things are moving really quickly, we're cutting to pans, we're cutting to chefs yelling I need hands, 86 dead chefs, blah, 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 we're running through, and then we cut to a slow
pan this way.
Just
it breaks. It's all about rhythm. Editing is it is kind of like music in a way, because it is about, if you mess up a rhythm, then the entire flow of a scene or the entire movie can hinge upon that, and it could really mess with your viewing experience. But what stands out to you editing-wise?
I think a lot of what I appreciate about editing comes down to sort of the emotional response that you can get from the combination of images. And like you said, if something's moving extremely fast-paced, then you have a movie that keeps you on your toes. If something is much slower and much more methodical, then you feel as if you're sort of tiptoeing around with the narrative, and sort of being able to get that reaction shot or get that cut that just works in the exact way that you want it to.
Yeah.
It's such a cool feeling when watching a movie, when you're watching someone do, like for example, if you're watching someone do an extremely sad scene and it cuts to that reaction shot of another character seeing this happen, and that makes you even more sad.
Yeah.
Then it just breaks your heart, doesn't it, Jamie?
It's its own art form. Like an editor would be dealing with both the visuals and like the music and the soundscape of it, and it has to be like, if you cut a sound too early, it can sound your ears. It's like a frame. Like frames matter when you're editing, and like if a thing is if like a shot is a frame off or a sound is a frame off, you don't like. It's not something that you would normally notice, but you notice it subconsciously, and it really like throws your brain off, and it makes you. It sort of like the film gets a little more disorganized in the process, and so it's all about just finding those perfect spaces for shots to linger, or when to cut to a reaction shot in like a shot reverse shot scenario, when to cut to an item,
when to let the scene breathe, when to let it.
Yeah, there's so many moving parts, and that's why I respect editors so much. It's just like it's so difficult to find out what's perfect about it, because it's so conditional to what story you're telling. Like comedies are going to be edited differently than dramas. If a drama is edited like a comedy, it can work, but it could be a little confusing.
Extremely
and,
situational.
Vice versa. Well, vice versa. Yeah, it's really interesting what editors do, and I think I respect them a lot even after I've like edited stuff like this show.
It's so hard.
Yeah, it's so difficult.
And really like, you can have a great director, you can have a great writer, you can get great performances from your actors. If you have a terrible editor,
all of it falls apart.
The whole thing doesn't work.
It crumbles.
And it just like pants fall to the ankles and everyone trips.
Absolutely. So Asher, why don't we get into today's film?
Let's do it. Today's film is Shaun of the Dead. Shaun of the Dead is a film about a man whose lack of initiative makes his girlfriend begin to have doubts in the relationship, and his friendship with his doubly incompetent best friend exacerbates the problem.
To make matters worse, a zombie virus outbreak strikes London, and Shaun begins to find his initiative in keeping the ones he loves safe from the zombie apocalypse.
That doesn't sound like a great situation to be in, does it, Jamie?
It sounds like a pretty awful situation to be in.
Have you ever been in a situation like this?
Not ever. Hopefully never. I don't live in London. I live in the United States. But, and that's, that, but that, situation is kind of where all like a lot of the comedy of this film comes up, because this is a horror movie, but it is also a comedy.
And it is also slight romance to it.
Yeah, it has like rom-com trappings, like he's got to, get the girl back in a sort of way, or, try to like prove himself as like he's not a schlub. He doesn't like, just lay around the Winchester all day, and
he's not always at the pub with his friend.
Yeah, with his friend who no one really likes, and it's like,
we don't stand with Nick. Let's get that on the table right now. We love you, Nick Frost, the actor.
Yeah.
Nick, you stink.
Well, Ed is his name.
His name is Ed?
Yeah.
Aw, I'm leaving.
No, wait, where are you going? Where are you going?
Jamie, what'd you do to me?
I just dragged and drop a timeline thing in. Anyways, let's get back to the movie. So, what do you like about the editing in this movie so much? Why did we choose this for the editing episode?
Well, we're getting close to Halloween times. I believe this will be coming out November 1st, which is just
hilarious.
A bit beyond the point. But we chose Shaun of the Dead because it's incredibly distinct in its editing style, and Edgar Wright is the director, writer.
Of course, he did stuff like Scott Pilgrim and Baby Driver and you know Hot Fuzz recently. Last Night in Soho.
Have you seen Last Night in Soho, Jamie?
I have.
Crazy movie.
We don't need to talk about.
We don't need to talk about Last Night in Soho.
But
all his films have a very distinct style that sort of makes editing essential to the experience.
Absolutely.
You do not watch an Edgar Wright movie without thinking about the editing.
Yeah, the films that he wrote this with Simon Pegg, but the films that he writes are built around the editing. I'm sure there's like cut two in the script for this movie, like all over it, because he writes with it in mind, and that's where a lot of the jokes that are in this film come from. For example, being the very opening scene, editing is used to reveal people in a really funny way, because the first shot is just the main character, Shaun, drinking alone. Like, you think he's alone because he's like staring off into space, and then it cuts to his girlfriend sitting right in front of him, and she's trying to get through to him, and that establishes, it's not only funny that like you didn't know she was there and then she's there, but it also establishes Shaun as sort of a zoned out character who's checked out of this relationship mentally.
And we're in that sort of space with him because of the way it's edited, where we feel like that abrupt cut where it's, she's like, "Are you even listening to me?" And he's like, "Oh." Then we're like, "We weren't listening to you." And suddenly we're here, and
it gets you to empathize with Shaun, even though he's kind of like a character you don't want to be like.
He's not a nice boyfriend, but the way that the visuals move and the way that the story is thrust upon the viewer, it makes you like need to empathize.
You need to be in his shoes, and it's really interesting. Shaun is a really interesting character to follow because he's just a guy. Like, he's a guy, but he kind of sucks in the way that all just like normal guys kind of do. They're like, he's just kind of like coasting through life. He's playing video games with his friends instead of going to work. And he doesn't close the door to his apartment, much to his other roommates' chagrin. And he's just like, and it is imperative that like Shaun kind of sucks so much that the film needs to get you in his shoes immediately. And with that first cut, it's literally the first cut of the movie. Right there, it gets you right in his, dress shirts. We're both dressed like Shaun, if anyone couldn't tell.
I've got a bit of red on me. He's got a tie around his head.
Yeah. Different points of the film, I reckon. Yeah. But it's in the editing. It's just it's the first shot. Yeah, the first cut is just so important, and it lays out how incredibly important editing is to this film.
And how it moves. Further in that scene, she's talking to him about, like, "You're spending all your time with Ed," and he's like, "No, I'm not." And then
you're like, "This Ed guy sounds like a piece of work. I
wonder
where he
terrible.
is." And then it cuts to Ed is right there. He's playing an arcade game.
He's listening to her just absolutely roast him.
Yeah, like read him for filth.
Yeah, and he doesn't care a lick.
Yeah,
and
then Shaun's
like,
he talks
your
about
friends don't like
friends.
me, and they're sitting right there as well, and they're
and
like, "Yes, we do."
Yeah, and those are the first like 3 distinct cuts of the movie where you're getting like, and it's working to, like I said, put you in Shaun's shoes, but it also introduces the characters in a really snappy way because. You get a short character introduction from how Shaun and Liz, his girlfriend, talk about these characters, and then bang, they're there, and then you're like, "Oh, okay, I know who this person is off the bat." Ed is kind of like a layabout guy who doesn't really do not care about nothing.
He's just over in the corner playing pinball,
and he's playing pinball.
He's playing pinball.
I thought
in
he was
Winchester.
on an arcade machine. Yeah, but and then her friends being kind of like uptight and a little high-strung.
A little bit high opinion towards Shaun, which like any of us would be probably.
Yeah, they're sort of like audience surrogates in a way where like you see Shaun and they see Shaun as both like just kind of just like a nothing guy. Like you ask yourself, why is she with him? What's going on? But it's problem. Like,
but
yeah.
Going back to the first question you asked, the sort of style of the film is so incredibly affected by the editing through, like, it makes massive use of hard cuts, fast shots, like these crash zooms, which is sort of an Edgar Wright staple. Classic.
Yeah.
And so we get the sort of tone that we are in a horror movie before anything even remotely horrifying happens.
Yeah.
We get a close-up of him brushing his teeth, and it's so visceral and gross that we're just so suddenly up close that it's like, well, I guess we've got to be watching a horror movie because I don't like what I'm seeing.
And it does a good job of cutting into shots that have a context that you give the film, knowing what it's about, knowing that it's called Shaun of the Dead, and that there's zombies that are going to, factor into the narrative somewhat later on. The first act of the film kind of plays a lot with like, it'll cut to a shot of like, someone's growling and, Shaun will like walk out and he's got like lumbered steps and you're like, oh my God, the zombie stuff is starting. And he's just him. He's sleepy. He's waking
tired.
up. He's got to go to work. And it does the same thing where it'll cut to like people at the supermarket and they're like barely
just mindlessly
alive.
Pushing their shopping carts.
Yeah.
Bill Nye's staring
sort of
out the window.
Walking out, yeah.
And then it's like, oh, he's not a zombie, he's just mean.
Yeah, he's just a rude guy.
He's just a rude little stepdad.
Yeah, and it does a good job of like subverting, because the film on the surface gives you these expectations, and what's so fun about the first chunk of this movie before the outbreak happens is that Edgar Wright is constantly subverting it and cluing you into what's happening while like making jokes out of it. So like with that, and with also the music sting that happens when he closes the mirror and his roommate's right behind him, which is like a big horror movie trope where it just like
spooky.
Boo, it'll like a big jump scare moment that also comes back later in the film.
There's sort of a moment where they show him just sort of like mindlessly standing at his job and you're like, oh, is he sick? Is he infected? He's bleeding from his shirt. Oh my God.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, it's a pen.
It's a pen and exploded in his...
It's silly. We have fun here.
Yeah, but that sort of foreshadows how later on, when he's actually killing zombies, his shirt becomes a lot more red and
covered
disheveled.
in blood.
Yeah, absolutely, like actual real blood. And it's a really interesting deployment of editing to set up the stakes, clue you into what's going to go on while also being like really funny. Because this film is a comedy, and it has another reason why I think it's very funny, like successfully funny, is that it's very snappy in its pace, and that like I think a lot about the scene where the outbreak has happened and they're trying to figure out how they're trying to like formulate a plan. How are they gonna go to save like his ex-girlfriend at this point? The plan. That's like one of the most like iconic parts of this movie is like when they're like, I've got an idea, and then it cuts to like these really fast shot, and it's like a
swooshing montage.
Yeah, like a really fast montage of just like, we're gonna go do this, then we're gonna go do this, then this, then this, then this, and then we're gonna have a nice pint of the Winchester and wait for all this to blow over.
Yeah.
And it'll
and every time
they go through 3 iterations of the plan, and every succeeding montage is a little faster because they're like, okay, blah 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 blah.
We've sort of created this language, and now we get to play with it.
Yeah, and it's a really wonderful.
And every time they
editing.
take their time at the end and always end with, and then you have your pint at the Winchester and wait for all this to blow over.
Yeah, like it's contingent on the editing to work as well as it does and be as funny as it does. And I think it's also, the film is just, even outside of those like montage scenes, which doesn't happen often.
Yeah.
It's just really snappy to begin with, because the thing is with editing is that like editing implies movement.
Yeah.
And when a director like Edgar Wright is behind the camera and he's moving this camera back and forth, and he's a lot of whip pans in this movie, and whip pans are like the epitome of like fast.
We're in one place, we're suddenly in another.
Yeah, and the editing also works with those whip pans a lot. There's a lot of like cutting in whip pans. So it'll be like Shaun's at his job and it'll whip this way, and it's just like, it'll cut in that blurry space, and then he's at home. And then it's like, it's sort of like a continuation of the shot, and it's used as jokes a lot. There's also some usage of match cuts in this, which is when, a match cut is when the composition stays the same between two cuts and like two locations. It could be locations, it could be like to signify, like in this film when Shaun goes to sleep in the kitchen and then it's nighttime and then it cuts, he's in the same position, the camera's in the same position, but it's daytime, and it's just a really fun way to...
And you see him wake up with sort of a...
Yeah, and it's like he's waking up that fast, but it's also the edit is waking him up that fast, which is like really...
It's almost like he's getting motion sickness from how fast the viewer got here.
This is a world where things are happening so fast, there's really no time to breathe.
Yeah.
And this film doesn't really give you time to breathe.
It's
because
scary,
it's so
but it's
fast.
also so fantastical that you're just like having such a good time while all this is happening.
Yeah.
And you feel like you're on an epic adventure instead of like fighting for your life, which is what they're doing. Do we want to talk about the long take?
The long take, yeah. So
much of this movie is such like fast-paced editing, and like that's a staple for any of Edgar Wright's films. I think the longest shot in Baby Driver is like 12 seconds.
Yeah, I think so.
But then there's this long take in
there's a long
Shaun of the Dead.
There's a long take. It lasts about, I want to say 2 minutes, and it's like Shaun is going to the store and he's like to get, a cornetto.
His cornetto.
He walks to... So the shot is him leaving his house, walking down the street, walking like through an alleyway,
past his neighbors,
and then to the convenience store, and then all the way back. And through that, it's like in this shot, this exact same shot happens twice, but it's one pre-outbreak and one post-outbreak.
So you see him completely clueless to the world, going through his same daily routine, walking down the street. But the second time it happens, it's like, all the windows are smashed.
Yeah.
There are people screaming, running down the street, and he does not give it a second thought. I think when he's in the convenience store, he like slips on a pile of blood
that he doesn't see.
And he just like, doesn't think anything of it. He opens the freezer to get the cornetto, and there's like bloody handprints on the door.
But he's like looking down. He's like not paying attention to his surroundings. And it's like, but within the long take, which obviously there are no cuts, it's not like there's no edits, but it is an editing choice, because the rest of the film is so snappy and fast-paced and like cutty. But the choice to like leave one bare long take is enough to clue you in to be like, oh, I'm gonna lock in and see, and like actually like, it's a point in the movie where you realize things are starting to shift.
Yeah, and I think that's such a useful tool for filmmakers to take with them, where if your movie's cut is so fast-paced, it's like that can work for the effect that you were going for, but you can also achieve different effects by breaking that language that you set up.
Absolutely.
And you can sort of get clued into a bit more of the substance of what you're working with, and letting... So much of editing is choosing when to cut, but another substantial part of editing is choosing when not to cut, when to stay in, when to just let it be there and exist.
Yeah, and I think an example of that definitely is the long take, and that's an example of it sort of leaning into the horror of it all, because it shows kind of like this society in disarray. But I think it also utilizes this in more of the drama side of the film, because there are like really tangible emotional stakes, even though this movie is very funny and it is quite scary at some points. It's really about this guy trying to like redeem himself in the eyes of the people who love him, and the people like who love him are like dying, and the end of this film is like close to the end is quite bleak. It's actually like
it's a really somber ending.
Like the scene with his like, I think of the scene with his father, Bill Nighy, in the car. There's like, it just plays out in a shot reverse shot scenario, and it's not like, it kind of locks into like, this is serious.
Yeah.
And the same thing with the scene with his mom near the end, and the same thing when they're all like trapped in the basement of the Winchester and the zombies are
and they sort of play
surrounding
with
them.
In those serious moments, they play with the fact that maybe not all the characters are clued into how serious this moment is. And so they'll have sort of cutaways to Ed's character, and he's sort of doing like a jokey thing, and Shaun's like, that's not funny, and we come back to him, and we're in that longer moment, and you're like, and suddenly like the language that has been like so close cut the entire film feels so alien to us, because the character that we've been like programmed through the editing to sympathize with doesn't want it to be that, and suddenly when the movie is becoming that, it hurts in a way.
It's a really cathartic like piece of editing, because it's like you do see Shaun sort of redeem himself throughout, like, and since you're made to empathize with him so early, that change in just the plot, like the editing has already clued you into like how you're supposed to be feeling, and as the plot changes, that means like you change with it, and you feel like a better person near the end. I feel like you leave this movie feeling more fulfilled with yourself, especially because, like I said, Shaun is such like a nothing character, but he's also living in nothing times, and we're also living like day to day.
So if you can amount to something in the nothing times, you feel like you've done this incredible feat.
Absolutely, and that's kind of like where this movie leaves us, with Shaun as like kind of this heroic figure, even though he's been through so much like adversity.
Which is sort of what it's like being an American with Britain right there. Just being...
Are you trying to provoke the British viewers of In the Scenes?
We have so many British viewers of In the Scenes, I don't know why we do
Apologies. But I think it's just like, and another thing we didn't talk about was like, again, the mundanity of his situations they're rendered with like action movie editing, like
it feels like the stakes are there, but you're just watching like people on the bus looking kind of sickly and gross.
You're watching Shaun like button up his shirt and like pee and like
flush the
put his
toilet.
name, and it's all just like, and it's like 5 seconds he's ready, and it's like, it's a good way to highlight that mundanity and also just like move the film along quicker. And
it's a quick film. It's what, like around 90 minutes, hour and a half?
It's a tight 90, I'd say. It's really like, I would say like 90 minutes without credits probably. Could be less, I mean. And something I really like is that this is Edgar Wright's first film, and obviously he's become such a premier voice in like cinema today. With, like I said, films like Scott Pilgrim and Baby Driver, and so much of the hallmarks of those films can be seen here. Like, this is such a breeding ground for his style of quick, like whip pans, quick cuts, editing, like jokey editing. Like the editing is like in on the joke. There is a scene where this is gonna sound absurd, but they beat an old man zombie with pool cues.
I forgot about
and
that.
Don't Stop Me Now by Queen is playing in the background, and all the hits are timed with
the music.
And it's
like
absurd because it's an absurd scenario, and that obviously informs a lot of his film Baby Driver, because that film is entirely set to music. Like, you can just see all of the seeds for his style here, and like seeing them grow as he keeps making films is really satisfying.
And as he continues to make films, that style of editing gets more and more refined, and he figures out the language that he wants to use and the way he wants to tell his stories so far in advance, which for many, many filmmakers is sort of an afterthought.
Yeah.
And I think that's what sets him so far ahead, is that forethought of this is how it's going to be executed at the very end. This is how it's going to land with an audience. And that's so important.
Yeah, he's such like a
editing.
master of his craft, I think.
Yeah.
I feel comfortable saying that because he factors in all aspects of the experience, and obviously you gotta bring everything together, and that's where the editing comes in. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What a great movie.
Shaun of the Dead.
Shaun of the Dead.
Jamie, what did Shaun of the Dead teach you about editing?
I think Shaun of the Dead taught me about editing to really have a distinct style, but also learn when to pull that style back if it's like good for the film.
If it doesn't help what you're trying to
Absolutely.
tell,
Like you don't always have to tell stories like Edgar Wright does, because Edgar Wright is Edgar Wright and I'm Jamie Bass.
And your stories aren't going to be like his.
Absolutely. Like no two filmmakers are the same, and I think a lot of people get lost and they watch Edgar Wright movies and they edit their movies like Edgar Wright, but there's really no reason for them to be doing
like,
that.
I need to do crash zooms and I need to make everything feel like it's important.
Because it's very like ADHD style, like we have to like everything is happening, da 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 da, and I think people are really drawn to that, and it's a really like easy thing to sort of accomplish, but I think you really need to think about the content of your film. If you're doing like a somber like dramedy, you can't just go to like Edgar Wright movies. You have to learn when to pull back a little bit. And even if like you don't edit like Edgar Wright, if you know you have a style that you like to work in, pull that style back at times when the film calls for it. So if you have like a slow, methodical type of style, you can, if you want to break the audience's perception of the film that they're watching, you can, make things go like just da 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 really quickly.
Yeah, there's a
or
way
vice versa.
Another filmmaker might tell the story of Shaun of the Dead that you don't see the zombie apocalypse coming at all.
Yeah.
And it would be very, very easy to make that feel like the world through just the edit without touching the screenplay at all.
I feel like it's very easy to take the bones of Shaun of the Dead and make it into a straight drama, right? Because all of the trappings are there. He's got familial troubles, he's got troubles with his girlfriend, troubles with his friend. He's stuck in sort of this like malaise because the world is sort of like.
And it's asking sort of sad
commodified.
questions like, what do you do with your friends who you don't really.
It's really
they
existential.
don't bring something of substance to your life anymore. But
Yeah,
you
like
having them around.
I'm turning 30 and I'm hanging out with my friends playing video games, and this larger than life threat is coming towards me that is the literal personification of death. It's like, when you describe it like that, this seems like the most serious movie of all time, but it also has like fart jokes, right?
Yeah.
So it's just about like, the editing is important to help telling your story, but you need to learn. It's just
you
the
need
basic
to know what the
principle.
story is you're telling.
Yeah.
To learn how to tell it.
Learn when to cut, learn when not to cut. Sometimes you just have to hold on a shot. That's a lot what I learned from that. What about you?
I think some editing tips I would take from this movie are just, like you said, knowing the story you're telling, but also being able to have those profound moments where something like really emotional is happening. You don't want to take away from that.
Yeah.
Learning to let your edit be shaped by the story, and when to let your story shape the edit, and understanding the difference of the control and how important that is.
Yeah.
That you understand where everything is when you're making that. It can fully change the end result.
Yeah, like those scenes where he's having like a compassionate conversation with his parents would not hit the same if they were edited like a scene, like say from the first act of this movie where everything's so fast and whippy and cutty and something like that. So it's really like, you got to just know your story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's all for this episode of In the Scenes. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, X, and TikTok at SGTV at USC.
To keep up with all our content, be sure to also visit us online at sgtv@usc.com. For SGTV, I'm Asher Thompson.
And I'm Jamie Bass. From all of us here at SGTV,
have a great night, Carolina.